And I remember when she was done, she came off and I'm looking at her like, is she done or did I break her? I lifted up her little arm and I remember it just flopping down. And I told my husband, I said, either she's really full or she's really drugged up from the morphine.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Episode number 182. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Eisenstadt, IBCLC, and I help moms with breastfeeding. This past May, I attended a conference given by USLCA, which stands for United States Lactation Consultant Association. It was held at a beautiful resort in San Antonio, Texas. I was honored to be a part of a panel of IBCLCs who were asked to talk about what we were doing in our careers that were making a difference in the world of breastfeeding. I was asked if I would like to talk about this podcast and how I felt it was making a difference. I was thrilled to be asked, and I said, yes, of course I'd love to talk about how I feel this podcast is making a difference. And I'll give you a little synopsis. I shared the story with how I started off with just a few listeners listening in a few states and countries, and now how we've evolved to hundreds of thousands of listeners, and we've now being listened to in over 93 countries. And I also gave them some examples of how I know that I'm making a difference. And I told them a couple of stories about emails and feedback that I've heard from moms telling me specifically in what way it's made a difference to them. So I had a great time. And sitting next to me on the panel was our guest today. Her name is Dominique Gallo. And she talked about how important volunteering in her community is. And she shared with how that was making a difference in breastfeeding in her community. And she encouraged people to volunteer. We chatted afterwards, and I invited her to be on the show. We had such a fun time on the show today. Can you guess what happened? My regular listeners will know at this point that there are some guests that are so easy to talk to, and we have so much in common and so much to say that the show goes longer than intended. So then what do? I usually break it down into 2 shows. That's what I did with today's show. Dominique has a great sense of humor. Get ready to laugh a lot. This is part 1. Let's get started. Dominique has been in IBCLC for 3 years, but has been helping mothers with birth and breastfeeding for the past 6 years. Dominique works as an IBCLC at a local hospital in Roanoke, Virginia. She maintains her private practice where she does doula work as well as lactation support, and is the new director of marketing for USLCA, which stands for United States Lactation Consultant Association. In her spare time, she hangs out with her adoring husband and awesome children. And I know that your kids are at home and they're with you. And when you're podcasting or talking on the phone, it's like a magnet. So I'm just going to let everybody know that they may likely hear kids in the background. And so I wanted to welcome you to the show, Dominique. And if you could also just tell us a little bit about the kiddos, their names and ages that we might be hearing from in the show today.
Thank you for having me. So I have 3 babies. The biggest one is Amberly, and she is 7. And the middle one, and she is a true middle child, is Adriana, and she is 4. And then my baby his real name is Giovanni, but we call him Frankie. And he is 19 months. And he actually ate and came in here and passed out on the couch. So we won't be hearing too much from him. Poor baby. And he's been outside since 9 o'clock. But the other two are running around here going strong.
You got to tell me, I know you get asked this all the time, how do we go from Giovanni to Frankie?
Very interesting story. We don't find out the genders of our children until they actually come out. Good parents come up with names, right? And they pick out two. So I can say usually we come to the table with about 5 in each direction, and we just kind of look at the kid and see which one fit. We had 2 girls, and we really liked Giovanni, and so we just kind of recycled that because we're kind of lazy and as normal humans, and we didn't want to have to actively look for a boy name each time. We were like, we liked it the first time, we'll just recycle it for the next. And so when he came out, I think a couple of things came into factor. One, we didn't think we were going to have a boy. We were completely surprised because we had 2 girls before. And I know it's possible, right? Because you get a 50-50 shot each time. But we just didn't think the likelihood of that was happening. We banked on having a girl.
Did you think that your body didn't know how to make boy babies?
Yeah, that is where we were at. You know, because my side of the family, there's all girls. Like my mom, for instance, is one of 5. She only has 1 brother. And then out of all the cousins, there's 15 of us, and there's only 4 boys. So 4 out of 15.
Well, that's a much stronger argument. Yes, I can see that.
And so my dad, though, is complete opposite. He only has 1 sister, and the rest are boys. And everybody on his side seemed to have boys. But when he hooked up with my mom, he got a girl. And that seems to be the running theme in the family, is that if the first one's a girl, generally they're all going to be girls. And so I told my husband, I said, the first one's a girl, I don't know what your chances are of having a boy. And he was like, well, I come from all boys. Your dad comes from all boys. That's enough, strength there. And I said, okay. So, but now we have 2 girls and 1 boy. So we were surprised when he came out. My husband was like, oh my God, it's a boy. And I was like, what? We were surprised. We just had no idea. And then they were like, what's his name? And I looked at my husband and I said, oh my God, this baby does not look like his name should be Giovanni. Like at all. And so my husband told the doctor, he's like, well, we don't know what his name is. The whole time in the hospital, we were like mulling over names because we didn't prepare. We'd recycled this old name from the first one. We had 5 girl names picked out that we were going to choose from and no boy names. And so we could not decide on a boy name that we both liked. But we did know that his middle name was going to be Frank. That's the only thing that we changed, was because when we first got together, my husband loves that hockey player. His last name is Gretzky. And so he was going to name my son Giovanni Gretzky. And so we decided that that was not a good name for a child. So we switched it to Frank, which is his father's middle name. So we knew that, and we really liked that, but I didn't like Frank as a first name. So we were like, let's just make it easy on ourselves. His name will be Giovanni. We will call him Frank because he does look like a Frankie. And then when he gets older, if he wants to still be called Frankie, he can. If he wants to be called Giovanni, he can. And then he just has a choice. And we were okay with that. And then so now we have our Frankie that is actually named Giovanni.
But you should also report it for him because he's going to be asked that question countless times.
Yes. We get it all the time. And especially at his school, because his school form says Giovanni everything because it has to be official. And it says, well, what does he like to be called? And I put Frankie. And they're like, how does that work? Because they're thinking like Gio or G or something like that. It's Frankie. So, but he responds to both. We call him both names. So when he gets older, he's not confused that he has this name that he didn't know about.
That is funny because I could see him sitting in the classroom in kindergarten, the teacher calling out Giovanni and him not paying any attention whatsoever.
Exactly. And see, that's what I was afraid of. So we do call, mostly when he's like doing something wrong, we're like, Giovanni. And, then he gives us that look. So
now that's funny also, because lots of times when someone is doing something wrong, like in my family, we call them by the first name, but we accentuate the middle name.
Yeah. But since we already call him Frankie, we were just like, Giovanni. And so then he knows like he needs to kind of back off. And I feel bad because he knows when he hears that name, it's serious. But
well, it's good. It's a good calling card. He knows you're serious.
Yep.
It really is a very funny story. And I imagine you're just going to be asked that for a long, long time until he can take over and start answering himself. So you gave us actually a little bit of fun background about the family. So you have a lot of kids in the family.
Yes. There's a lot of us.
Where did you all grow up?
Newport News, Virginia is where I'm from. And my dad's from Chesapeake. My mom is actually military brat. So family is from everywhere. I think they're all normally from, North Carolina, but they just everybody was born in all different places. I think I only have one aunt that was born in the Hampton Roads area. Everyone else was born like in Japan and Hawaii and all those places. So, but there's a lot of us, and that's just on my mom's side that there's 15. I think there's I want to say there might be about 10 or 11 of us cousins on my dad's side.
Wow.
I know. There are a lot of kids.
Have you had a family reunion yet?
We used to, but then on my dad's side, we used to have family reunions. And then when my grandfather died, we didn't have him every year. We had him like every other year. But then when my grandmother died, we haven't really had him anymore. I mean, I don't know why. I guess maybe we just did it so that they could see all the kids at once. But which is kind of sad. But us cousins, we still, we talk, and thank God for Facebook because, we can literally talk every day and keep up with each other's lives. And
those are the good parts about Facebook.
On. Yeah. So we do keep up with each other. And I think, so on my mom's side, there's about there's 6 great grandkids now. And then on my dad's side, there is 2. There's four because my cousin just had a baby. So there's 4 altogether.
Well, A, you're losing track, and B, every time someone adds another one, you have to change the number in your head.
I know, because there's too many. A big family. And I'm happy because then that means that there's always somebody that I can call. There's always somebody around.
And the kids will have lots of cousins.
Yes.
So let's talk about your first beautiful baby girl. And so you had a bunch of names picked for her too, right? But you waited for her to be born until you decided what she looked like.
Yes, which is odd. And I would tell you the hospital doesn't like that either.
Oh no. They've
got paperwork.
They gotta fill out that paperwork. They gotta send it off. And they don't really want to be waiting for you to decide what your baby looks like.
Exactly. They weren't happy. And in fact, she actually did not have a name for a long time. And I finally called Social Security and was like, how long do we have? And they said you have 10 days to come up with a name, or else they will mail you a Social Security card that says baby girl or baby boy, and then whatever the mom's last name is, because that's what they do in the hospital. And then you have to pay to change it to whatever it is that you want.
Same thing like with home birth families. So I had a while, but when it gets to a certain point, you have to pay for it. So there's that incentive for you and your husband to buckle down and just come to an agreement.
Yes. I will say with each child, it got better. My middle one actually left the hospital with a name. There was no confusion, but it was the last day. And my son, I think we mulled it over for about a day and a half before we were just so frustrated and was like, this is just what it's going to be. And then we just left it at that. So he actually had everything before the last day. So we got better.
You're getting better. Is there going to be a fourth where you might actually know at the time of the birth?
That's why I told my husband, I said we should probably have 4. I think we'd be so prepared for that baby.
Not necessarily the best reason to have a baby, but it would be funny.
Exactly. I told him, I said, I think we'd be better prepared, name-wise, everything, crib-wise, clothes-wise, everything.
So tell me a little bit about breastfeeding with your first. One of the things I always like to know was breastfeeding on your radar during your pregnancy? Is that something that you knew that you were going to do? And if so, how did you prepare for it with books, classes, videos, just hanging out with other breastfeeding moms?
Another funny story about that. So I have a science degree, a bachelor in science, and I'm very science oriented, everything. I originally went to school to be a veterinarian, but I couldn't cut it with the surgery. So I switched my track. The smell of formaldehyde just did not do it for me. part of my degree, I had to intern. I had to do 2 internships. One was a smaller one. I want to say it was like 800 hours. The other one was a larger one. I want to say it was either 1,500 or 2,000 hours. I don't know. It was whatever the equivalent of 40 hours a week for 2 months. That was what that one was. I did that big one with the WIC office. And I remember 40 of those hours had to be with the peer counselor. And she was talking to me about breastfeeding. And I remember asking her, what is that? And the look on her face was like, you're in college? You know, it's just, you don't even know what that is. And, you know, I should know what it is, right? Because I see dogs breastfeed. I saw all kinds of animals breastfeed. Like, I know it happens, but I never associated that with humans because nobody in my family ever did it. Babies got bottles. And I remember her telling me, she was like, well, how do you think Jesus ate? And I said, well, you know, I don't think Mary had formula, you know, like I just had to sit back and think about it.
Now, you're not going to get insulted when I say this, but it's like, that is like so interesting because you're around the whole animal kingdom. And yet what a sad commentary that you didn't relate that to human beings.
I tell everybody that, and, you know, I own my idiocy, you know, it was like, it didn't dawn on me. And I'm not going to blame it that I was young. I mean, that's just common sense. And I just never thought about it. So that 40 weeks, I will say, I enjoyed my internship at WIC, but that was like the best part of WIC is just learning about breastfeeding and what it is, how to do it, all the benefits, because these things I had no idea about. So fast forward about a year, and that's when I got pregnant with my big girl. And so I call her my planned accident because we planned to have children, just not as early as we did because we were both fresh out of college. And because I worked at WIC, you know, they're very big on nutrition, stuff like that. And so I knew to get a doctor or somebody that was focused on that would be a midwife. And so I remember the midwife did a breast exam on me after she did the traditional pregnancy workup and stuff. And she says, please don't. Basically, you know, don't mind me being bold for saying this, but she says, you have the perfect breast for breastfeeding. Are you going to do that? Is that something you want to do? Because I can help you. And I said, well, you know, I learned about it through my internship. You know, if it works out, sure, I'll do it. You know, very casual, like whatever. Yeah, I'll do it.
But also, actually, sometimes I live in a world, and I don't know about you as an IBCLC, but sometimes we hear some pretty awful stories about what moms are told about their breasts or nipples. And most of the time it's not true, but I just love the fact that she said to you, you have the most perfect breast for breastfeeding.
My husband was like looking there too. He's like, why is she looking at your boobs? You know, I didn't think nothing of it because she's a health professional and I know that they have to get in there to do their work. So, you know, I was just very casual, nonchalant. Sure, if it works out, I'll do it. And, you know, she's like, I can help you. And I'm like, great, you know, this is all wonderful. So fast forward to her birth, which was a very traumatic birth and didn't go exactly as planned. And so I didn't get to have my midwife. And so pretty much what happened was given morphine and something else. And so I was very sleepy and out of it after my birth. And I couldn't really hold her without looking like I was going to drop her on the floor. So the nurse gave her, and this is from my husband because I don't remember any of this. The nurse gave her to my husband with a bottle of formula and said, here, she needs to eat. And my husband, he said, I remember us talking about breastfeeding, but you weren't really looking like you could do anything. And so I figured she had to eat in that moment. So I just fed her. And he said that he wished he didn't because she seemed to be sick the entire day. Like he said, she threw up a lot. She didn't want the other, you know, he kept trying to offer her bottles and she wouldn't get it. And he says, I remember the nurses getting really upset because I wasn't going to force this bottle into her mouth and she wasn't eating. So I think that first 24 hours, she literally only ate that one time and then she threw up the rest of the time. And so the next day, the same thing.
So you said you had a traumatic birth and now the big problem is that you were so heavily medicated that you didn't have this whole awareness about the baby and felt like you couldn't hold her or breastfeed her. But she was okay. It was just
she was fine. Yeah. It was just everything was on my side. She, as far as I know, she was fine. She was okay. There's no reason why she could not have nursed besides the fact that I was just out of it. And I think too, if they tried, I would have been on board, half in, half out, but I would have done it. So the next day, the nurse gave me the baby with the bottle and was like, you need to feed her. She didn't eat all day yesterday. And I'm like, well, I thought we were breastfeeding. And then she goes, oh, you can't breastfeed. You're on morphine. And I'm like, okay, but why would you give me that if you knew I was breastfeeding? And I think she was just so frustrated because I wasn't trying to feed the baby. She went and got the doctor. She was like, I'll just let you talk to the doctor. And, I'm like, okay, that's fine. And the doctor comes in and he's like, yeah, she's wrong. You can breastfeed. You're fine. And then he walks out and nobody offers any help. And so, my husband was like, so what do? We took a childbirth education class and she talked a little bit about breastfeeding, but I didn't take a full-length breastfeeding class. And so I just said, forget it. And I started unsnapping my hospital gown and I laid down in the bed. And I remember taking the blanket off of her. I don't know why I did it, but something was just like, this has to go. So I uncovered her with the blanket. And I remember snuggling her in so close to me that I can feel her stomach moving up and down from breathing. And I can feel her little heart puttering. And I held my breath and I said, okay, now your turn. This is the part where you have to do some work too. And she just opened her mouth like a little baby bird and latched on. And it did not hurt. And I remember being taken aback a little bit because I wasn't aware of how strong it was going to be. But then I remember dozing off. And then when I woke up, my husband had her. And I was like, did she eat? And he goes, I think so. She came off on her own. And I grabbed her because I didn't want you to roll over on top of her. And I said, okay. And then so about an hour after this conversation, which was probably 4 hours after she ate, she woke up again and she was fussing. And so my husband was like, what do we do? And I said, well, I'm just going to do the same thing again and see if it works. And I laid down on my side and I tucked her in real tight to me. But that time she didn't kind of sit there like, what's going on? Like she opened her mouth really big, like a little baby bird. And she just latched on and I could hear her, and I remember when she was done, she came off and I'm looking at her like, is she done? Or did I break her? I lifted up her little arm and I remember it just flopping down. And I told my husband, I said, either she's really full or she's really drugged up from the morphine. And I remember my husband saying, let's just hope it's milk and not morphine.
Both you and your husband, you're great. You have a great sense of humor. And I'm sure that continues. Is very helpful in a lot of things, parenting. But I'm just listening to your story. And it's like we get so hung up on the books, the videos, the classes, the et cetera. And you're just kind of coming down to brass tacks. You're like, well, I don't know. Nobody showed me. Let me just lift up my shirt and offer it to her, which is great.
That's all I knew. And, I didn't even know what a lactation consultant was, which is embarrassing because that's what I am. It's funny. I didn't know it was an organization. And once I got done nursing my daughter, I told my husband, I said, I'm going to create a job where I help women breastfeed. And my husband was like, oh yeah, that's great. You'd be perfect at it. Cause you pretty much did this by yourself with no help, even though he was a huge help. And if he wasn't around, I probably wouldn't have done it as long as I did. And so I remember talking to some friends and they were like, Dominique, there's already that job. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, it's a lactation consultant. They've been around since about 1985. And I'm like, what? I didn't get to create a job field. But I'm glad that there was one already there because then I found my niche and what I really liked. I kind of just moved into it from there.
That is such a funny story that you're going to create jobs. You know what? There's not only is there nothing wrong with it, but that's how the profession came to be because at some point someone said, you know what? We need to have trained people to help mothers, help them with breastfeeding because the art and science of breastfeeding has been lost over the formula feeding years, the popularity. And so for exactly the same reason, someone said, we need to figure out how to help moms with breastfeeding. And they created a job they created that industry.
Yeah, I'm glad they did. It was a lot less work, too, to come into an industry where it's already created than try to create one.
Yeah, but come on, let's face it. In your mind, you thought you created us. Go with that.
I did.
Taking a little break to let you know that this show is being sponsored by allaboutmothering.com. The new membership site that focuses on you so you don't have to go through pregnancy through postpartum alone. All About Mothering is having a summer special as we work to build an amazing community for you to hang out with. Check out the details at allaboutmothering.com. On Friday, June 23rd, 2017, I'll be making several important announcements on this show. For everyone who is part of our All About Breastfeeding community Facebook group, you will get the news several days ahead of time. If you're not part of our group and would like to get the inside scoop ahead of time, please join us by searching for All About Breastfeeding Community on Facebook and click on the Join Now button. Let's get back to the show. I'm just still stuck on that story because we get so stuck on the proper way, position and latch, how mom should sit up, the pillows that you're using, the stools, and all that fun stuff, which I think does come in handy. And some moms certainly need that and benefit from that. I also think that somehow we've gotten so far off the beaten path that sometimes, though, the most simplest of ways of mothers being with babies, sharing the bed and breastfeeding has gotten lost in some circles. And man, I'm telling you, like, I would love my listeners to just remember this story, that I think it's really important to take classes and have a good understanding of what's happening. But I also really want you to just take note that when you have your baby, just try laying down with your baby, lifting up that hospital gown or the shirt or whatever it is you may or may not be wearing, and just offer your baby the breast and see what happens, and try not to think that everything has to be so perfectly perfect. Just let's see what happens when you put that mom and baby together without all of the other stuff. And it may very well work out just really nice.
Yes, I agree. And that's one point that I drive home to when I teach my breastfeeding classes. I encourage you to take the breastfeeding class, even though I'd never took one a day in my life. And, but I tell them, I say, I'm going to go over all these mechanics and stuff, but I tell them, if you forget everything or if you're frustrated, just put your baby on your chest and just see what happens. Because, a lot of times we just have too much knowledge and we get in our way. We complicate things where it doesn't necessarily need to be complicated. And so for that reason, I'm kind of glad I never took a breastfeeding class, because I probably would have been so focused on the logistics of it all, figuring out, is that a swallow? Is that a suck? Is this right? Is that, than just putting her to my breast. And I mean, she figured it out. Like, I had no idea about the sideline position. That's just what I did because I was in the bed, and I was tired. And so that's what I did. And we didn't know anything about co-sleeping at the time, although I will say my family were very big co-sleepers, and we always traditionally gift the mother a crib, and the crib holds the clothes and the teddy bears.
It's like the big old playpens where you put all the other stuff.
That's right. So I knew about bed sharing, and I too am a child of bed sharing. I shared a bed with my mom till I was like 6. So there's hope, bed sharers. They do leave.
I have living proof of that too. They do leave, but they get ready and they're like, I don't really want to be in there anymore.
I knew that we were going to bed share because that's just what my family did. But, I had no idea about the sideline position. And I think I did that pretty much for like 2 weeks. And then I realized that their, cradle hold was a thing. And so I would just hold her in my arms and just lift my shirt, and she would just latch on like herself. I mean, she was just like a little baby bird. I'd lift up my shirt and her mouth just opened so wide and I would just pop my breast in there and she'd just be happy. Like, I didn't worry about, was I hearing swallows or anything like that? And thank God for kellymom.com.
Yeah, she made it easy for you in that sense. But it's also funny listening to you and your husband's like, either something is really wrong and she's heavily medicated, but you quickly learn what, milk drunk or milk coma looks like. You just used your instincts and, because we both teach breastfeeding classes, so we're obviously huge proponents of breastfeeding class. I think what we're both saying is sometimes, I think you use the words, we just kind of sometimes get stuck and we can't get of our own way with regards to position and latch, because we also know that there's, even when you get that going well as new mothers, we still have lots of questions. Is my baby gaining well enough? Are all these feedings that they're doing every day, is that normal? And so there's lots of really good things to take breastfeeding class from. But I think the one thing that you can get out of this part of this conversation is that at the same time, try not to get so hung up on the rules about position and latch, and sometimes just do what comes naturally. So tell us, how long did you breastfeed your first babe for?
So she breastfed for 14 months. And I will say she kind of did it abruptly. I wasn't ready to give up the dream. So I kind of pumped for her for another month or two until she denied me the right to give her my milk. I remember the day that she never drank breast milk again. She asked for milk and I went to go pull a bag out of the freezer so I could thaw it for her. She shook her head no and pointed to the refrigerator. And that's where, because we had soy milk in there. And she said, no, milk, and pointed to the soy milk in the refrigerator. And I about died that day because I was like, what? What do you mean you don't want my milk? It's mine. I make it for you.
It's such a rejection, isn't it?
It is. And I wasn't very prepared for that at all. She got breast milk until she was about, I want to say 16 months, but she was done with me. I want to say like 14 months. I think she went to sleep that night and she nursed to sleep. And the next day she was just, I offered it to her in the morning. Nope. Before nap. Nope. She didn't want nothing to do with it. She was like, I want my cup, and she'd go by her business.
How close are your kids? Could you have been pregnant at that time?
They're relatively close, but I definitely was not pregnant with the middle one. The two oldest ones, they're about 3 years apart. So the middle one nursed for about 2.5 years. And now I did nurse her through the pregnancy of her brother, just because she's just one of those ones that just really enjoyed it. And to this day, I really do not think that she would be done breastfeeding. I think she would still be doing it at 4, only because she just loved it just that much. And she would go around and she'd tell everybody, how much she loved her milkies she called them sides, side and other side. She loved her sides and she just wanted her sides all the time. And when I walked through the door, my husband was like, Mom's home. And she'd do her little dance and say, the sides are here.
So cute.
It is. And so, of course, my son, he's 19 months and he is still nursing, but he's kind of a mixture of the two. Some days I think that he's done and he won't ever nurse again. And then he'll start nursing like a newborn again. So, I'm just rolling with the ebb and flow of him because I can't quite figure him out with this whole breastfeeding thing.
Were your second and third fairly easy also to latch on, or did you have any challenges with either one?
My second, she was pretty easy, and I think she was easy because I just knew what I was doing by that point. So I'd already nursed one for a long time, and by then I started down my education to sit the IBCLC exam. So I knew more, I knew what to look for, and I just knew just from personal experience. My third one was kind of difficult in the beginning just because he was tongue-tied and I was in denial about his tongue tie. Not that I don't think that they don't exist, but my first had tongue tie and she nursed fine. No pain, no anything. My second one had tongue tie and a lip tie and she nursed fine. And she was actually my fattest baby at 4 months. She was 20 pounds. Him, I just could not get him on deep enough. Even though I'm looking at him and his mouth was so wide, I just could not get him on deep enough. And my nipple came out looking like a Nook nipple. It was like all weird shaped and everything. And by 12 hours postpartum, I had severe breakdown. And so the lactation consultant came in and she said, honey, she goes, we saw your baby when he was born, when we did, the exam, and he looked a little tongue tied. And I said, no, not my kid. I was like, he'll nurse fine.
Yeah, he'll be just fine.
I was like, I just have to get the right position and he'll be fine. And she's looking at me like, that it's going to hurt. Look at where she opened his mouth. She says, look where it is. And she knew I was a lactation consultant. And I'm looking and I'm like, yes, I know where it is. But I think if I just do this. So his was a little complicated, but I just ended up getting him revised because my husband, it was like, I'm just tired of seeing you struggle. It shouldn't be this hard. If that's what's going to fix it, then just do it. They did it right in a room. It was so easy. And then after that, it was easy peasy and smooth sailing and fine.
How old was he when you had the procedure?
I want to say he was probably 30 hours old, maybe.
You had the procedure done in the hospital?
Yeah, I did. Where I went was a baby-friendly hospital. The lactation consultants always see the baby after the birth. So you have, when they do the bath and stuff like that, if you choose a bath and they do like the pediatrician check and everything, the lactation does a once over on them too. They made note of it, she said, but they like to, because they're very conservative, they wanted to see what he could do They wanted to see what he could do because, sometimes they're stretchy and it doesn't cause an issue. So, but once they saw that I was struggling and that I had that breakdown at like 12 hours, they were like, we need to do something about this. So, but yeah, I got it done in the hospital and it was easy peasy. He didn't cry for it. I mean, he was asleep because he had just got done eating. They did use scissors. They didn't have laser. I think where his was, I think they could get enough of the tissue cut because we didn't have any issues after that. And I mean, he didn't wake up for it at all. They stuck that little silver thing in his mouth and they cut it. That was it. And he didn't make a peep. And then after that, like it was smooth sailing. Like my nipples healed so fast after that and they weren't misshapen when he came off. And he seemed to be much happier too. There was less clustering once we got it fixed.
Your story is interesting because, first of all, with your other two, that it didn't interfere with breastfeeding. And so one of the things I'd love to talk about a little bit is that we all have frenulums and some babies do have these ties. There are quite a few things that go into our evaluation of how babies and mothers are doing. And one of them is not necessarily to just observe that there is a tie, but to also evaluate and assess how the function of the tongue is working in order to remove the milk from the breast. So there are some babies that it's looking like it might be a problem, but it actually turns out that it's not really a problem, that this baby can breastfeed well. And so then there may not be any reason to do a procedure. And I could totally understand if you have two other kiddos who are doing just fine, and then you're told that this baby is tied also, but even though you have all the signs that, well, this time, not only does your baby have this, but it actually is getting in the way of fully functioning, full range of motion of your baby's tongue in order to get the milk out and you feel comfortable and not have a breakdown of nipple tissue and be able to transfer that milk well. I can easily understand you being like, no, there's nothing that we need to do. But then the other interesting part of your story that I'd really love for people to hear, because there's controversy over it. And there's, I think, more healthcare providers that are not interested in doing anything about it, do not believe in the procedure. And so it is not that common to have everybody on board at the hospital to be telling you, and to take that a step further, to have the procedure done in the hospital, which I absolutely love this, because you're not a mom going home for days and days and days with more and more pain, less and less milk transfer, and then more and more bottles to get your baby fed, and a whole host of other things that are happening that are getting in the way. And then maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, then having the procedure. So there is so many good reasons to have the procedure done as soon as one possibly can, preferably in the hospital. That's the way it was done in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in the hospital. We know that, but modern medicine have moved away from that. And I honestly don't know, certainly in my area, of not too many places where that's done in the hospitals. I love that you're able to share that. People can see that, because sometimes people just get so hung up on what is not done and is not allowed to be done and cannot be done. And then here we have Dominique coming in with this excellent story.
Yeah. But I will say this, the hospital where I had my son, they used to be very backwards. And I guess I honestly don't know what happened, because it's like one day they were doing all of these great and wonderful things, and they're actually baby friendly. So they have, around the clock lactation care, and it was great. I'm glad too that I got it done in the hospital, because they followed up. After their procedure, they came in a few hours later, they checked his tongue to make sure it was healing fine and that my nipples are fine. It wasn't like snip and then everything's going to be perfect and there you go. It was like they made sure that everything was fine, because some of these kiddos I've seen, we can get their tie revised, but they still need a little bit help transferring. Some can pick it up right away, while others need a day or so, to get it together, to figure out that they have more movement of their tongue. And so, but they were there several times
You're there in the hospital having some expert eyes on you, making sure that everything is going well.
Exactly. Because I can say this, honestly, if I would have went home and nobody ever checked him, even though I'm a lactation professional, I probably would not have gone the extra step to have him checked by somebody else. Because even though I saw the tie and I know in my head that ties can affect breastfeeding, just from my experience that it didn't with my other two, I was still a little bit in denial. So I wouldn't have had it checked at all. I would have been like, we're fine. And it probably would have reattached.
We do that a lot. We're fine. We're fine. What's the name of your hospital? The hospital that you were in?
The hospital is MCV, and it's attached to, it's like a teaching hospital. So there's like students there and everything. So, and it's in Richmond, Virginia.
Even better still that it's a teaching hospital. Well, kudos to this hospital for doing a great job for moms and babies and breastfeeding. You just, I'm expanding on your story because you just don't hear that much. I really like that.
I'm so happy I had him there. It was overall a good experience. And then especially too, if the breastfeeding was a good experience. And even though I was completely annoyed that they were telling me that my baby wasn't transferring well because he was tongue-tied, I am grateful that they brought me to the light. And, she was like, look, I know you see it.
The other thing that's fun too is every time we not only have something happen to ourselves, it's just even a much stronger message. Because as an IBCLC, of course, we can't have every problem that every mother is going to have so that we're able to validate it. But for you to have had two babies who you were told might be an issue, but it turns out not, one can easily see why you think baby number 3 is not going to be. But the really good part about your experience is I'm sure you take that into your private practice because you experienced it yourself, that denial. And when you're talking to other parents who are in denial, you're able to really fully understand what they're going through.
Yeah, and I do. And I tell them too, because oftentimes what I find is that the mom is, let's do it right now. Because she really wants the breastfeeding to work. And if she's perceiving this as a barrier, then she wants to get it done so she can get on with her life and her breastfeeding experience. And the dad is usually a little bit more, he's more skeptical. And I always tell them my story straight up. I said, look, I get it. I was you. My first 2 babies were tongue-tied, and one of them had a bad lip tie for which she broke when she was 18 months, saved us $100 consultation fee.
Some of those really bad lip ties will break on their own too. Not that I'm advocating for
right.
that.
We don't slam your kids into walls, but on that day, I was a little bit happy that she ran into a wall that day, just because the pediatric dentist was like, yeah, we're going to have to cut that because it was causing issues with the food getting stuck up in her lip. Just because it didn't have a lot of mobility. And at first I didn't want to put her through it, and I didn't want to pay $100 to have it done. So
now let's see, Dominique, can I really trust that she just went into that wall all on her own? I'm not quite sure.
Because she was so fat, when she was a baby, she was a very clumsy walker. So she definitely did that by herself. But I tell my parents all the time, I was like, I was very skeptical. And I was like, and when I had my son, I was a lactation consultant for a while after that, and I've seen it and I've helped moms, with other ties. And I was still in denial because I was like, I nursed 2 babies that had ties and I never had this problem. Why is it a problem now today? And I think when they hear that I too was in their shoes, I think it kind of helps them out a little bit. But, and I'm really big on options too. And I'm like, so you can choose to do nothing and we can see what happens in like a few days and see if it gets better, But I was like, is it really fair to ask that of the mom or of the baby? And, and then they tend to understand that a little bit better too.
Yeah, but you are right. I do find that with some moms who are on board because they're dealing with this situation, that sometimes the partners just are not interested in doing anything. I mean, I have probably 3 moms that I'm working with now, and that is one of the things that they're telling me is that she's like, if she can get it done yesterday, she's right there, but she's got to deal with her partner who is saying, I'm not comfortable having this procedure, someone going in with scissors or lasers or quartering into my baby's mouth. And part of it is, I think, because I don't use this language, but a lot of people do, clip the tongue. That just sounds So awful.
Yeah, I had to stop using that phrase. I would say they use a metal apparatus, which sounds horrible, right?
Because apparatus sounds like this big machine coming in.
I would say they use a metal apparatus to lift the baby's tongue so that they can see where they're cutting, and they just clip the tongue right out, just clip it, and then it's done. And the look of horror on their faces. And I would have moms come back to me and say, the way you explained it made it sound horrible, but to see it done, it didn't seem like it was that bad. And I said, oh. So I was like, maybe I should think of a better way. And so I no longer call it an apparatus. In fact, sometimes I don't even bring it up. I just say he has a tool that he uses to make the frenulum more pronounced so he can see where he's cutting, and then he releases. I use the term release.
Thank goodness we learn as we go, right? And thank goodness we're willing to pay attention and take heed of the feedback we get from families.
Exactly. Because, apparatus does sound very bad. But, I don't know. That's what it is, I guess.
The thing is, there are some people who are just like, I don't know, like good, strong stock that they're made of. And when you say certain things to them, they're like, okay, that's cool. Let's just do it. And other people, we're going to like wither and want to crawl into a hole when you use something like that and never, ever come out, because that language that we use for some people is really, really important. And other people, I have some parents that say, yeah, let's just go do it. Let them get in there and get it out and let's be done. And they're just so matter of fact. But I think overall, we have to take the road assuming that most parents are going to be we need to be delicate, and they may be thin-skinned, and they're going to be worrisome about it. So we have to take that road of being very delicate when we explain what they're going to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Dominique and I, we had so much to talk about. Her story about all of her babies being tongue-tied is going to be a source of confusion to some, and I get that. When I talk to parents, the belief is that if your baby has a tongue tie, you will probably not be able to enjoy normal and comfortable breastfeeding. Dominique, as you heard her, she said she found it really hard to believe that her third baby's tie was the reason for her painful breastfeeding, because her other babies who were diagnosed with tongue tie breastfed just fine. She had no pain with them. She had plenty of milk. They gained really well, and they breastfed for well over a year. I wanted to address this issue so no one leaves confused. Let's start with the word frenulum, Frenulum. It is a Latin word that is singular when you say frenulum and plural when you say frenum, Frenum. It means little bridle, which is a great way to describe this small fold of tissue that secures or restricts the motion of a mobile organ in the body. You may be interested to know that we all have frenulums. We have a lingual frenulum, which is under the tongue. We have labial frenulums that are attached inside both of our upper and lower lips. We have buccal, Buccal, frenulums, which connects the cheeks to the gum. In addition to finding this small fold of tissue in our oral cavity, it can also be found on the brain, external genitalia, and our digestive tract. I share this little bit of anatomy lesson with you because I'm finding that the public is often under the impression that some of us have frenulums and others don't, which translates to some to mean some babies have frenulums and others don't. I want you to know we all have frenulums. With regards to breastfeeding, we know all babies have frenulums. What we're taking a closer look at as lactation consultants is where the frenulum is placed, is it having an impact, a negative impact on breastfeeding? To what degree is this frenulum causing restriction of the tongue? There are other factors that we're evaluating during consultation with mom. In Dominique's case, I did not have an opportunity to evaluate her baby. I'm going to guess that perhaps her babies had visible frenulums that were diagnosed as tongue tie and were really not. Or possibly the frenulum was quite long and stretchy, and with a good milk supply, Her other two babies were able to bring her nipple far enough back into the mouth, and the tongue had enough mobility that it did not cause her any pain, and with an abundant supply, her babies were able to breastfeed and have good milk transfer. And this lovely frenulum on her other babies did not interfere with normal breastfeeding. Since I didn't see her, it's unknown to me. However, clearly with her third baby, one can say, well, you have a mom that's used to breastfeeding. She had put several years already into breastfeeding. However, she's now latching her new baby on. However she latched her other babies on before, it was good enough. Now she has a different baby, latching him on the same way, but this baby must have had a very short, thin tissue that greatly restricted his tongue mobility and did not allow for bringing the nipple far back to that soft palate, or we say the sweet spot, and it caused her a lot of pain. I said thin tissue because if the frenulum was a tight band of tissue in the posterior region of the tongue, a frenotomy with the use of scissors would probably not have solved her problem, and this is what the procedure was done in the hospital for her third baby with just scissors. I hope this helps to explain why she had no problem with her first two babies, but clearly did with her third, the lovely Frankie or Giovanni. Dominique had lots more to offer, and in part 2 next week, you will hear her talk about what she really loves about breastfeeding. Her commentary, it gave me goosebumps, as well as made me laugh hard and loud. You will enjoy listening to her talk about why she feels breastfeeding is the best parenting tool she owns, and you'll hear me share my thoughts on that also. Dominique also talks about her role as an IBCLC, as well as her volunteer activities with USLCA. Until next week, bye-bye.